Hey, I'm Ryan Guzba on GitHub, and I'm here with Andre as usual, Treeform on GitHub. So, hey, Andre.
Hey?
Um, Today we're going to take a little chat about NIM 2.0. So it's been on the forum a couple times recently, and it's a really interesting topic because it's been a while since NIM 1.0 came out, and I think NIM has come a long way. And I think Andre and I both agree NIM 2.0 seems so close. And so what we want to talk about is what we think is really important about NIM 2.0. Also talk about maybe some other things that have been discussed and just generally share our opinions on things. Um, just to clarify, of course, we totally do not know all of the things going on regarding NIM 2.0. Like
In
we are
fact, we know
certainly not
nothing.
experts.
We
Yeah.
know nothing. We're just
We know
users.
basically nothing.
Yeah.
We just use NIM a lot. We like it, and we see what we wish we had. So think of this as just like, just a feature request, basically. All right, so I guess why don't you start us out, Andre? What's the first thing you put in your post?
So yeah, I made this post because there's a lot of NIM 2.0 posts, and I want to get like my opinions heard. Very selfish, but the thing is I think like NIM 2.0 is already here. If you have NIM with the right flags, it's already like so different from the current NIM that we have or that we use, right? It's just like almost like a different language, which I think like we should just canonicalize those, of those flags, right? And kind of just use them everywhere. And that's basically, well, it is. Because problem for library authors like us is when we ship a library, like now we have to basically make it work on two NIMs, right? The NIM
Yeah,
1.0, and then we have to also test for NIM 2.0. And I just like want to drop the 1.0 without all the flags, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say it's not only that we have to test the two versions, but there are times, for example, like with threads on, where if we want to make a library that requires that, anybody that uses it now has to have their whole compilation unit, no matter how big it is, be able to work with threads on. And so it's kind of like, well, at that point, it's like not even NIM. It's like NIM threads, like the
Mm-hmm.
competitor to NIM, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be really, I think, quite great if a lot of these obviously better flags just became defaults.
Yeah, so I think first flag is the memory manage or arc, right? Like both of them.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, if they just become standard, like a lot of kind of interfacing with C and operating systems and threads just becomes, much easier.
Yeah, this is, I think, actually like an underratedly huge improvement, specifically because it enables the next thing on our list that we really care about, which is obviously the threading and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, arc, orc, they're easy to think about. They're oftentimes faster, um, and it
Yeah.
would just be nice to basically just use them all the time and not have to think about other things.
Yeah, they allow the move optimizations, right? Again, which I
Yep.
think RefC did not allow. So RefC would like copy in this case. So faster if it can figure out a move, and also the predictable destroy, right? We built this like ECS system, which basically we use the destroy to do our own reference counting, and that worked great.
Yeah, the destroy thing is actually quite a big deal. And again, it's another one of those NIM 1.0, 2.0 things. If you want to have a reliable destroy hook, destructor, whatever you want to call it, like you've got to be compiled with orc or arc. And you can't basically force people to do that unless you literally don't let it work on RefC. And again, you've basically forked yourself off of NIM
Mm-hmm.
as a library writer. And so yeah, I think orc, arc are great. We use them pretty much constantly. We very rarely have issues, but we do have like some every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think we got a reply that said, maybe some orc arc related issues should be fixed first. And
Mm-hmm.
like certainly we should not switch NIM to a not quite ready thing. It's just it feels like it's so close to ready.
Yeah.
Just push through and like let's get there.
Yeah. I only use RefC when I forget to type in the command, right?
Yeah.
And I use the RefC by accident anymore now.
Yeah. Or if I just do nimc-r test.nim, right? If I just doing like the least number of characters to
Yeah.
make sure something didn't broke, right? Again,
Yeah.
basically being lazy. But if I'm like really deliberate about what I'm building, yeah, I'm always arc to be honest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Next big topic is threads on. I think this will be huge, right? Because it basically allows any library to use threads. Right now, using threads feels like, oh, you're entering a whole different world, right?
yep.
Because right
Uh,
now, threads, make your code slower. You can't, like, it's harder to pass things between threads. You have to, like, allocate and delocate them manually. It's just like, yeah, it's weird. Or you can use channels, but usually for our stuff, it's like big things that we're moving, not simple messages. So it's like, yeah, it makes no points to serialize a gigabyte of data to like move it from one thread to the other.
Yeah, at that point you just shouldn't even be doing the threading because like you paid too high of a price in the first place with the refc copy. So what's really exciting about the threads on thing is actually shortly after we made this post, even I think threads on is now the default on Devel for nim. So this is happening, and that's awesome. Like I know there's like prices to it. Oh, like it's a little slower or whatever. Well, first off, you can always turn threads off. But the other thing is there are ways of mitigating those costs. And if we don't just like rip the band-aid off and start moving in that direction, which has now happened, it'll just get delayed and delayed and delayed. And like being able to like vastly improve NIM's thread story. Which is like we needed arc and we needed a few other things, and now we have both plus threads on Devel. Like, it's so close, and this will be just, I think, the most seismic improvement NIM 2.0 will make. Is that instead of having a thread local heap, single-threaded paradigm with like, you could do it a hard way and get the threads back or whatever, like. That kind of, we aged out of that. We're at 2.0. We know more. We're smarter. NIM's better equipped to handle it. We have the better tools. Like, here we go. Threads on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'll be cool. Then any library can go, oh, hey, I can speed this up. Just launches, n threads. Does this work? Return it, right? We don't have to go like, oh, are the threads on or not? Like, to be different. It's, again, like designing for like two different NIMs at that point. The threaded NIM and the unthreaded NIM. Yeah.
There was a thing I was working on for Windy where it turns out I've made it so we don't need threads on, but like it looked like we were going to need threads on, and it was like severely unpleasant because it was like, well, I mean that okay, kind of can't use it really, right? Or at least I felt that way as a library author. Like inflicting this on other people isn't cool.
Yeah.
But once it's the default, it's fine. So yeah, I'm really, really genuinely excited about this. And we mentioned the performance cost. So there's, again, work being done to mitigate that where, as far as I understand it, NIM's switching to the memalloc allocator when threads are on, which is going to be the default allocator basically as far as I understand it. And benchmarking has been done, prototypes have been done. It looks like essentially no cost, whereas currently there is I would say a pretty sizable cost because there's just one global heap lock, but that's because it's in progress. That will go away.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, between these two, like honestly, just that, I'm happy. We got a wonderful NIM 2.0.
Exactly.
Do we even need more?
Yeah, ship it. Ship it. We're done.
Exactly.
We're done.
This is so easy to underrate just how enormous that is. I mean, that's like fundamentally an enormous upgrade for us. So, very cool stuff. But let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah, next thing is the experimental, the overloadable enums, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's like the enum names in NIM is the most weird thing, right? It's like everything in NIM, it like looks normal except the enums. Enums have these like weird Hungarian like Win32 inspired things. It's like, why am I programming Windows APIs again? So weird, right?
So I just have to let everybody know. This is definitely Andre's like pet peeve. He really does not like the enum prefixes at all.
They don't exist anywhere else.
They're not pleasant. It's actually kind of funny because I think some places in NIM use the little prefixes. Other places are just using kind of longer enum names. We've gone the longer enum names route because the prefixes are just kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
But the idea behind overloadable enums does make perfect sense. If like a function signature says it expects a certain type of enum, and you get left, and left is a member of that enum, it should work. It shouldn't be like, but what left? Like, well, like which left.
Yeah, you only take one of them, right?
It's only take one of them.
Exactly.
I'm sure there's maybe more to it, but like Iraq was able to put something together, and the problem for us now is that it's trapped behind an experimental flag, and that flag must be set project-wide. As opposed to just inside of like our little module or whatever. So we kind of can't use it, which is like a bit bittersweet. It's like it was done, but not really.
Yeah, we can use it in our user code, right, for our own code.
Sure.
But if we ship a library, again, we have to tell our users to look, hey, use this weird flag for all your projects. If you import us, it's weird.
So again, though, just to be totally clear, like I would be happy. Well, first off, is this I wonder how much this strictly depends on NIM 2.0. But even if it does, if this delayed it, I would rather have the other things. But I know you really care about this. So
Well,
it just goes to show there's no right answers for anything.
yeah, I don't think there's anything to delay. Just make it the default, remove the flag, done. Right? It's like, it already works.
If it does already work, then yeah, maybe it's that simple. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
This was your baby. This is not my baby. So
Yeah. Yeah, next we have the dot macro.
dot operators.
Dot operators, which I think is really cool, right? You define this dot macro on your type, and then whenever it finds an unsupported field, it just calls you, and then you can like make up what that field means, and that's like really powerful for like a bunch of stuff. Here I'm using it for the vector stuff, the vector library that we have, VMath.
Yeah,
right?
VMath. Yep.
Yeah, so there's like, so in GLSL, so VMath tries to be kind of like GLSL, and in GLSL you have what is called the swizzle operators, and the swizzles, what they do is you can basically specify, x,
any combination
of them,
vector elements, right?
Yeah,
so like just to be clear, you have x, y, z, but you call like x, z, y, y.
Yeah.
And that would give you a vector of those components, right?
Yep, exactly. You can do like xxx, like I have example here. It'll just like repeat the x at the time, or flip it entirely, zyx, right? And then
so
also,
go ahead.
And then also for some reason, GLSL also defines like different names for x, y, and z called RGBA, or the other one, the STP ones.
Never used those, but I am familiar with the IGB as well.
Yeah. Right now I literally have to have like this humongous like 10,000 line file to kind of generate each one of these, right?
Yeah.
But the dot macro just takes care of it.
You have 4 slots for 4 things, so it's 4 to the third times 3 because there's
exactly.
3 of them.
Exactly.
So like
there's 4 of them. Yeah.
Well, there's 4 of them. You're right. So it's 4 to the 4th times 3.
Exactly. It's like
it's a lot.
Explosion. Yeah.
And also, who wants to write that by hand?
No.
When you can have CodeGen take care of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's like perfect thing for macros to do. Yeah. And it's like there's one bug with it which basically prevents me from using it, right? It's the fact that if you define this macro, now any error in your code will always like reference this macro, right?
Yeah,
it's like, oh, you forgot a field. It goes, hey, you have this macro on vec2, right? Like, did you mean the macro? It's like, no, this is
not even talking to vec2.
Exactly, right? It's like so weird. And it's like, it basically like every error is now, oh, the dot macro like wants this. It's like, no, it should only error out obviously on vec2. Right? It's like if I misspelled the field, going like vec2 dot, something broken, it should just error out there, not when I'm doing something else, right?
Yeah.
Totally like open file, and I misspell open file, and it goes, oh, but did you mean the vec2 macro? It's like, no. So weird.
All right, so we're about 10 minutes in, and we have a few more, so let's keep cruising, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next couple are kind of related, I would say. Why don't you go ahead and...
Yeah, so DSSL, I think, like, you have to use this flag almost always if you're doing any kind of network access, because almost everything nowadays is HTTPS, and the DSSL basically compiles the machinery to access HTTPS sites, right?
Yep.
And it probably, like, should like be on by default, maybe, because, again, like, what happens a lot of times is you run a program, and then it says, hey, at runtime, mind you, right? And like once the program starts running, it says like, it's like runs, and then it goes, hey, can't access that site. You didn't like compile with DSSL. And it's like just infuriating, right? I realize that DSSL brings more.
Runtime is huge too, because you might even have tests that test HTTP, but if you don't specifically have an HTTPS test, your thing will look like it worked all the way through CI or testing or whatever, and then you'll get out there and make your first HTTP request, and it'll go,
exactly.
Like, blow up. And DSSL has other implications and issues for other platforms, but in general, it's not our favorite thing.
Yeah, the big thing I think like on Windows, it's really bad because like you have to ship all those like weird looking DLLs plus a cert file that you cannot update, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's just weird. So we come up with alternative solution. We basically don't use the stack. We wrote our own library called Puppy, and it just uses the OS APIs to do all that. And so when OS updates its certificates, we update our certificates, right? And we don't have to ship any extra DLLs on Windows. It's not a big of problem on Mac or on Linux because they usually have those DLLs installed in the system.
It's a Windows thing.
Yeah, but on Windows, it's like basically kind of have to bring a little bit of Linux with you wherever you go, right? It's like,
and not the best parts. I don't think anybody's the world's biggest OpenSSL fan. So,
does OpenSSL has any fans? It's like, it's a little bit of a train wreck of a project. There's so many forks, and people constantly complain about. Oh, and SSL v3 now is breaking them. It's like,
well, so some things I would say about this to add is like, first off, NIM is a great language. One thing people love to make in NIM is games, and guess where people play games? It's Windows, right?
Windows.
And so, like, if you want to make a game and you ever want that game to talk to a server, like, you now have a very unnecessarily complicated distribution problem, which is you don't need to make that any worse, which is you got these DLLs you got to put in the right place, and you have this certificate authority file you got to put in the right place, and like, yeah, it's doable, especially if you're already shipping like a big package, like maybe you don't notice. But the nice thing about NIM is you can literally just get like an exe and you're good to go. But you can't if you need DSSL, but you can still have that if you use Puppy. And the other maybe small story about why that whole CA certs thing can be a problem is, unless I misunderstand, this is a story I told you, Andre, so you'll remember. This is like, so we have in a previous life, we shipped a desktop app a long time ago, and that desktop app to this day talks to HTTPS servers. Those HTTPS servers now use Let's Encrypt to have their SSL certs replaced every 3 months. That only works because Let's Encrypt is in the certificate authority stack somewhere, right? It didn't get there 10 years ago. Like, it got there relatively recently because those authority files are updated. And so the danger of you shipping a static one is like, yeah, it'll work for a year, 2 years, 3 years. But like, that's maybe not how long you want your app to work. Maybe like your app to work like kind of indefinitely. And so I think that the static files thing is not so great. Furthermore, same with the OpenSSL version. Like, what if it turns out there's a security flaw in either one of the certs or the... So anyway, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Long story short, Puppy's great, and it doesn't replace everything you'd need NIM's stack for, but it's wonderful, and you probably would be better served using it for a lot of things. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you're using a server and serving files, usually on Linux, then that's not a problem. Use just the normal stack. But yeah, if you're like on Windows or shipping a desktop app, I think then
and then there's, Windy brings in the whole async HTTP without NIM and stuff, but I think we've made our point. There's more out there. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Moving on to Zippy. Yeah.
So Zippy is really cool. You worked basically... You're the Zippy master. You know everything about zips. Again, it's another Windows problem, right? Like when
it is a Windows problem.
First time when I wanted to read zips on Windows, I got just weird errors, something like structure does not align or something, right? Runtime error, right? It's just like, what's going on? And like, you have to ship the zlib DLL and it has to be the correct version and the correct, 32-bit versus 62-bit. It's just
and the right version so that the bindings line up. Yeah. It's very delicate. It's true that once you get it working, it will continue working, but it's just not even necessary. Like, just at this point, just use Zippy. You have uncompressed, you have compressed. It's probably all that you will ever need. Super easy to use. Like, zlib is basically dead for NIM, I would say, unless you need streams or some other obscure things, but you probably don't.
So and you got it faster, like in a lot of cases. Like, you can actually
vast majority at this point.
Exactly.
So there's a few cases I focus on. There's Windows, there's Linux, and there's Apple, Intel, and Apple ARM. So on Windows and on Linux, you have the zlib1.dll or whatever it's called on Linux. I have a Ubuntu 22, 20, and 18, and then a Windows machine. I've tested it against all the pre-installed zlibs. Zippy beats them at basically everything all the time. So it's better there pretty much no matter what you do. On Intel Mac, it's also better, essentially all the time. On ARM Mac, it ties or is better, but Mac has definitely put effort into optimizing zlib. Like, it's way better on Mac than it is anywhere else. And so Zippy is sort of like a peer there instead of sometimes twice as fast on Windows. So, anyway, long story short, Zippy's great, just like Puppy. Totally, you should be using it because don't complicate your shipping on Windows. It's just not worth it.
And you'll be faster. It's great. Yeah. Next thing I have on this list is the async stack traces. Again, like, I think it's like a very easy change. Async stack traces just like give you a bunch of garbled or junk info. Like, you can basically remove it with a simple like regex or an if statement, right? Just like, don't give me the junk lines from the standard lib, and they actually look fine. So
I'm not a total expert on the async stack traces. The few times I've seen them, they are enormous and annoying, but I don't really work in async much, so I can't really share like a super strong opinion. But I think a lot of people do spend a lot of time in async, and I think they would probably appreciate better stack traces. It's like this is one of those like a quality of life thing that isn't sexy, but somebody would someday make a lot of people's lives better if they did. Is that good characterization?
yeah, I think so, and I think it's like relatively like little effort. Like I have an example in here, like of how
Why don't you
can
open it up? Let's see what those look like.
Yeah. So this is what it looks like, right? This is what I'm talking about, and I have massive ones, really easy. So here I have a little script right here that just removes it. It basically turns like this stack trace into this stack trace, right?
Yeah.
And all I do here is, again, I just filter out everything that contains lib pure async, right? If you just filter out this lines and filter and like break on this like character, which includes more stack traces, like you're good to go. Your stack trace becomes super small and readable. Like we should just do that. It's like somewhere this needs to live. That's it.
Well, it's out there, so people have seen this thread. Hopefully, it gets some attention. There's an issue. It looks like it's got some activity. We'll see what comes of it.
Yeah.
So coming up on 20 minutes, we did have a list of other things we could mention. Do you want to talk about a few more, or do you think we should end this video here? What do you say, Andre?
Let's do it. Let's go through the list.
Okay. All right. Here we go. The next thing that we can talk about, I would say, is an easy one. So another request someone put in was that, hey, there's a lot of like backwards compatible switches and deprecated stuff in NIM. Here's an opportunity to remove it. And I would say that we don't, I think, run into too much of this, but I would take that person's word for it. Inevitably, things are accumulated. And if it makes sense to get rid of them, like, sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah, we should. I think, like, I'm all for it, right? Yeah. Like, I just want to make more, as you see, I want to make those experimental flags real not flags, but just be in the language. And exactly.
Yeah. And I do know that activity even on those is happening. And so, like, all these things that we mentioned, they're not unknown to the NIM team. Like, stuff is happening. It's just, we don't really know what they're doing because we don't really spend our time following what the compiler folks are working on. We're doing our stuff, right? Yeah. So, only so much time in the day. But this stuff I know has activity. So anyway, the next one is everybody's favorite, well, one of everybody's favorites debates, which is the idea of the option or optional, defaulting to not nil, requiring option instead of allowing nils. Why is nil not runtime checked, STD seg faults, that kind of stuff. Anything you want to share on that one that might be relevant to NIM 2.0?
Yes, that's weird. I generally don't use optional that much. Or not nil, right? I just check my nils all the time. I guess I'm just like old school or whatever. Or maybe I just come from Python where like it's natural to have nils and you don't generally use optional, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so, but I don't know. It's like, it feels like the ref is nil and optional are so close and they're like semantics. Like it almost needs to be one thing somehow, right?
Sure.
And then also another weird thing is that if you do access a nil, it's usually a seg fault.
Yeah.
And nothing else works like that. Like if you have an array, right? You access it like you'll access like the 0th element of the array. It says, index there, right?
Yeah.
But in NIM, if you do the same thing with like a ref something, it's now a sig fault, right? Like I feel like if you have checks on, which we compile a lot of our code with checks off after we test it, right? Yeah. But if you have checks on...
only performance-sensitive stuff, and we're probably very weird for doing that. Most people probably just keep the checks on because they're harmless.
Exactly, yeah. I think like it should do the check for the nils.
Yeah. So like, to be concrete about that, it's like when you make a seek, it has some length, and if you attempt to access past the length, and NIM didn't check, you would seg fault, right? But instead, you get an index defect because NIM inserted a check in advance of your read that made sure it was going to be safe, right? And so it's basically protecting you from a seg fault there, in my opinion, right? But then it doesn't do that for ref types. And it could easily insert a nil check in advance. But they do have std/seg faults, which is like a little import you can include that then does make seg faults turn into a nil ref exception or whatever. And to me, it's like, why then why do it backwards? Like if you're gonna do it backwards for ref types, why not do it backwards for array types too, or something? I don't quite get it. But yeah, to me, it should either be always checked for all the things with checks on, or I don't know. But so in general, you said optional, not something you use a ton. It isn't something we use a ton. I think this is mostly because we kind of work in a small team on our own libraries, and like maybe this is more of a problem for larger teams or something. But I don't tend to run into nil options or nil issues a lot. So I don't have strong opinions on this, and I'm not really sure if this is as much of a thing as people make it out to be. But maybe that's just my experience.
Yeah, it's my experience as well. Just null pointers aren't a thing that I run into regularly.
Yeah. I'm sure there's more we could say about that, but what I think is, we've used option before. Like it's cool. There's times where it really does make sense, but I don't necessarily know about the big idea of like pretending nil doesn't exist, because it does.
I think that's a mistake. I think there's like languages that do not nil, right? But then what do you do? Like, I guess you wrap everything like with a little boolean that says whether it's like nil or not, right? Or some sort of like uninitialized object that you carry around, right? Like, yeah, this is like an empty object, right? Don't use me, right? Basically equivalent to a nil. I don't know. I think it's just like, yeah.
People would say, well, it encourages you to check and it doesn't segfault your program or whatever. But I think at some point you just do have to write correct code, and there's just no way around it. And when bugs happen, it should just do the right thing so you know what bug happened, which is why it should totally throw an exception so you know exactly where the nil happened. Totally shouldn't segfault. That's the worst possible thing it could do.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's my famous last words on this would be, option's cool and all, but like let's make the error better first, to take the pain away. All right, just to keep moving, the next thing we talked about is the whole case sensitivity versus insensitivity and NIM debate.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this a ton. What is your hot take?
So, in the past, I was for the case insensitivity rules, right? Even though pretty much every thread that mentions NIM on Hacker News, Reddit, wherever, people constantly complain about this, right? But my take was like, hey, if you import like a C library, you don't want to use the C convention, right? But I think I've actually did a 180 on that recently. I actually think that this case sensitivity rules just like pollute the Reddit threads and the discussion for like no reason, being such a small feature and basically never coming up. Like it's just like almost like some sort of mental weight. Plus, I have now wrapped so many C libraries, right? Like I always wrap the C version, and then I kind of have my own NIM version, because whenever you wrap a C library, it always like wants pointers, it wants you to allocate memory, it uses C string, it's like ugly, right? All kinds of like weird things. So like you end up wrapping those kind of C names anyways, with NIM names. So it doesn't really like save the wrapping at all. Alright? Yeah. So it's like why do we have this feature to like basically provide no benefit except create flame wars on Hacker News, right? It's kind of weird. That's basically my take on it. It basically doesn't improve or disimprove my life in any ways. I just hate seeing the flame wars about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I will add to that by saying the two of us working together have chosen specifically to like but like cement ourselves into like a matching pattern, right? We use kind of camel case, a few other things that are commonplace to us, and then we run NIM pretty and a few other things to kind of like make the formatting and discussion about that kind of stuff that isn't actually important go away. We don't want to hear about it. So even though my personal opinion is like I don't care a terrible much, and like I'd rather have NIM.0 with this than NIM 2.0 6 months from now without this if I had to choose. But meaning the case sensitivity changes. Like any effort here that slows the other stuff down, maybe not a big deal to me. But you're right, it comes up a lot. We working together have pretty much gone, I think, maybe like the Go format route, which is like kind of we almost don't even want to have opinions on formatting. Like it's just not even worth thinking about. We want to have it be the same so that it doesn't get in the way of reading each other's stuff. And neither of us care terrible much about, well, like we do care, but if we both do the same thing, we don't care. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like productively working without debating this stuff kind of is good when there's like a canonical way to do it. NIM definitely doesn't have that. NIM has so many options and features and ways of writing things. This is only like one example of the flexibility of NIM. not a huge deal to me. So it sounds like you have maybe a stronger opinion than I do.
Yeah. I just hate seeing it on Hacker News Flame Wars. Like, people complaining how it's, like, stupid, and other people defending it, and it's like, I'm just tired of defending it. I don't think, like, it, like, improves my life in any way.
The people attack. Okay, let's move on because there's more. I think we've given this some time. Clearly, it's okay. So another interesting one that's I think very relevant to us is the debate, often taking the phrase "batteries included" or like should Nim have a big standard library or a small standard library with a bunch of like Nimble packages or like some weird other combination. There's a million ways of skinning this cat, right? But in the end. What would you like to say about the whole standard library itself and how to keep that moving forward?
I don't know. I think it's fine the way it is. Don't change it, basically.
Remarkably reasonable opinion. I don't really have problems with the standard library. And I think it's great that if I don't like the way the standard library does something, I can find a different way or I can write it myself.
Look at Puppy and Zippy. We did that to the standard library. We just created our own packages. People could import them, right? Yep. No problem.
And I could see someone saying, well, if they were in the standard library, maybe people would like just use them instead of reaching for zlib or whatever. Like you can kind of make up all sorts of things, but the reality is when you sit down with Python, probably the first thing you import is requests, which is not part of the standard library.
No.
And I'm pretty sure Python's doing fine.
Yeah.
So like I'm all for a really good standard library, but I am not for like giving bad packages this permanent privilege. And I think the advantage of not having too much forced into the standard library is like there's a little competition and there's like room for alternative opinions, right? So there was this like explosion of JSON libraries. You wrote JSON. There's a whole bunch of other ones out there,
like
and they all do things differently and have their own trade-offs. And it was like if that wasn't possible, or was strongly discouraged or whatever, like we wouldn't have all these options, which do have their benefit. It wouldn't have been explored, and like. I don't think it would be a good thing. I don't think we're better off having one and like strongly discouraging the use or creation of anything else, basically. Yeah. So if things are really good and having them in the standard library doesn't hurt anything, like wonderful. But I don't necessarily agree with the mindset of scoop everything up into the standard library and like make it all the maintainers' problems and make them not have any owner and no opinions and that kind of stuff. Like I don't really think that's great, actually. That's my current opinion.
Yeah, there's some things, maybe, hot takes, I guess, like zlib, right, in standard library. Right now, it just basically burns people on Windows. Should it even be there?
Should it even be in the standard library?
Yeah.
Well, that's the weird thing is, like, is it? It's. I think you have to do nimble install.
Oh, you do, yes.
Zip.
Yeah, so that's not one of them. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But it's on the nimlang like GitHub, so it kind of looks standard lib. Like what is standard lib in that universe, right?
Exactly.
It starts to even have a more flexible definition. Like in my opinion, go ahead, Andre. I've talked a bunch. You keep sharing your opinion.
No, I think that's it. I think the other one is Swiss Puppy. Should the current HTTP stack be part of the standard library? I think so. It should just be fixed, right, to work on Windows, kind of the way Puppy does through system APIs.
There is a part of me that would advocate, I guess, for like actually moving more and more things out into their own Nimble packages so that they could be updated independently, like not really tied to Nim. But I don't know, I wouldn't want to put a bunch of effort into that and delay what I think is important about Nim 2.0. Yeah. So like long story short, I think there's like interesting questions here. I guess I like the idea of passionate people working on projects, doing a great job, and then like celebrating that through people using Nimble packages as like a good thing instead of, why isn't it in the standard library being like the first question everybody asks. So yeah, kind of a weird answer there, but that's what I got. What do you got?
Yeah, I think whatever you have is fine. Yeah, there could be marginal improvement, but really, enable us orc and threads, and we'll be happy.
Yeah. We did get a little over 30 minutes here, so. Let me look through and see if there's some interesting ones. So that would be specifically relevant to... I think the last thing we could maybe talk about is just like the general concept of concurrency in Nim, and I think this can close us off. What do you think?
Yeah.
So as a primer, Nim 1.0 had a garbage collector system called refc, or at least that's what it's called by all of us. And it had this paradigm of a thread local heap. And what that meant is that two threads could not share reference to an object because it was not like visible to the other thread, right? So to move things between threads, you had to do a deep copy. For small things, that's no big deal, but if you want to like offload a huge workload and then get it back to the main thread, like you're in big trouble. Like let's say you're going to, render a 4K image, right? Well, that's like, many megabytes of data. You could just copy it, I guess. Anything can be, but like, it's just wasteful. Arc gets rid of that. You can now do shared heap. That's a huge upgrade. The other huge upgrade is now with threads on. All of this is actually even doable without basically forking off of nim. So that's a little background. What do you think of nim's concurrency?
Yeah, I think so. Like to me, there's kind of like I guess 3 different types of concurrency that nim can support, and I think they're like good for different cases, right? So the first type of concurrency is the kind of the old refc model with channels, right? You just copy stuff between them. Yeah, that works. Like many like I think Go is like famous for that, right? Or like even Erlang, right? It's like yeah, you can copy stuff over. Great, but I think it like works in the network type environments where the messages are kind of small, right? Then you move on to the second type of concurrency, which is what's called like old school concurrency, fork and lock kind of things, right? And that's better for when you have like big buffers of like images, right? And you're just like, okay, I created these buffers, I will use a lock to kind of guard them. Hey thread, now you get this buffer, render your stuff into it, right? When you're done, give me stuff back, right? And that's like, I would say like the old school or like synchronized locked like version of this stuff. And I think that's like more what fits us in our use case, right? And that's why we're so happy with the threads on stuff. Is that yeah, we do actually like do work on threads. We don't only use threads for like doing stuff sometimes else, right? And then there's a third model which is like lock-free data structures type stuff. But that's I feel like even more academic. It's like you kind of get functional programming in the mix. Right, it's kind of a little bit too out there. Maybe it can work, but for us, really, the simple locks just like solve our problems. We don't really have, right?
Yeah. So Memallic does do some like lock-free data structure stuff, but that's an example of like it's a specific case that's extremely performance sensitive, and like they need it and they made it work, and that's why nim is gonna adopt it, right? Yeah. But for many things, you're either like in a web app where maybe you're currently using async, but it's perhaps you could argue it's a bit of a pain. And then if you could just have thread per request, or even like green threads or coroutines per request, like maybe you could just write simple synchronous code and the concurrency just kind of happened by magic. And that's one thing. It's like threads, but they don't talk to each other, right? They're just all going in their own little way, right? And then there's concurrency in the sense of like what you were saying in that middle case, where like, hey, I have A and B, and they're both big. I want to like compose them together, but I don't want to have my main thread be blocked doing that, but my main thread to be able to see the results. And that's where you might like kick off a task, the thread's write to the shared memory and let it, the main thread, all the main thread needs to know is it's done. It's ready, right? And so it's a super tiny message, but the shared heap is critical. And that stuff I think kind of comes up a lot. But not for servers, more for desktop apps or for like, other types of workflows. And that was the kind of thing that refc just kind of like didn't let you do. And it was a pain for games, for some stuff we were working on. For graphic stuff, it can be a pain. And so I think it's great that we have arc and orc and threads on as the default. Like so much more stuff is going to get so much better in nim. I would say that we don't really know exactly how everything is going to work out for threading in nim. It's still kind of getting worked on and investigated by people and whatever. But like, if we get to like the baseline of threads on orc arc and things like at least work a little bit, people can go figure it out. Like we can all go write libraries and like debate how to do this best, learn from people literally implementing it, meeting their needs, and like come together just kind of passively by seeing what libraries get popular and who had good ideas, just like the JSON stuff. And if we don't have that baseline that allows the kind of iteration, then we just sit here stuck. And that's where I feel like we are right now. So very excited to have this stuff.
Yeah.
Have anything you want to add?
No. I think that's it.
Okay, well, so this is our almost 40-minute chat on NIM 2.0. I would just like to say once again, we totally don't know everything. We don't even know the latest. Like, we're just some dudes that use NIM, and we like it. And we use it enough, and we've written enough open source stuff that we feel like we have at least, like, relevant opinions based on experience. So hopefully somebody enjoyed listening or whatever. Maybe they got some nuance that wasn't clear from forum posts or something.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. All right.